An Atlanta cop cracked my mother's skull open on a church sidewalk, and most folks on that block thought they were watching just another bad stop that would disappear into a report. They didn't know the woman bleeding into the concrete had a son people used to call Ghost. They definitely didn't know what it looks like when a man who spent his life fighting other people's wars finally decides to fight one of his own. My name is Marcus Hale, but for 20 years in special operations they called me Ghost. I was the guy who showed up in places that weren't on the map, did what needed doing, and slipped back into the dark. When I finally retired, I bought a beat-up cabin in the Blue Ridge, started keeping bees fixed, an old pickup, and tried to remember what normal felt like. No news, no crowds, just the buzz of the hives and the sound of wind through the trees. The one person who could cut straight through all that quiet anytime she wanted was my mother, Evelyn Harper. To Atlanta, she was Miss Evelyn from New Hope Baptist, little lady with the silver hair and the big choir voice, the nurse who'd show up with soup medicine and scripture when you were sick. Before that, she marched for voting rights, patched up beaten protesters in church basements, and wrote people's names down in a little diary when the system pretended they didn't exist. To me, she was just Mom, 5'3" of stubborn, the woman who hugged me before every deployment and said, "If I ever tell you I really need you, baby, you come home. You hear me?" The day everything snapped, she had just stepped out of church on a heavy Sunday evening in Atlanta, laughing with her friend Sister B about how the pastor once again promised a short sermon and absolutely didn't deliver. The air felt thick, that kind of July heat that makes you tired before you even move. Across the street, a patrol car lit up behind a beat-up Honda with a cracked taillight. 19-year-old Deshaun stood there in a cheap collared shirt, skinny, nervous, doing what every black kid in the South learns to do when the blue lights hit. Hands up, yes sir, no sir, hoping that will be enough. The officer who stepped out was 27-year-old Ryan Whitaker. White, red-faced, jaw tight, the type who wears the badge like armor for his ego. He didn't start with license and registration. He started with, "What are you doing in this neighborhood, son? You think I don't know your type?" His voice was loud, sharp, too much heat for a busted taillight. Deshaun tried to shrink into the car, saying, "I'm just coming from work, sir," and you can hear his voice shake even through the bad phone audio later. My mother didn't march over there swinging her cane. She wasn't out there trying to start a protest. She just took a few careful steps toward the curb, leaned a little on that old ebony cane, and said in that calm nurse voice she's used on 1,000 scared patients, "Officer, you don't have to talk to him like that." That's all she said. No shouting, no cussing. Just a reminder that the kid in front of him was human. For a man who's steady inside, that wouldn't have been anything. For Whitaker, it was like somebody jabbed his worst bruise. Witnesses said his whole face changed. On the video, you see his shoulders square, eyes go cold. He spins on her and barks, "Shut your damn mouth, old lady, or I'll put you down next." Then he marches toward her, snatches her cane out of her hand like he's disarming an enemy, and shoves her with both hands. He doesn't guide her back. He throws her. Her feet slide on the hot sidewalk, her back arches, and her skull hits a metal light pole with this hollow sound that cuts through every conversation on that block. She drops sideways, dress crumpling under her, and a dark patch starts spreading under her head like someone spilled ink in the sun. She never screams. My mother, who delivered babies in broken clinics and hummed hymns to men who were dying, just gives this tiny, confused gasp like she's trying to understand how a boy young enough to be her grandson could treat her like that. While she's lying there, Whitaker steps between her and the crowd, waving his arms and yelling that she interfered with an investigation. He paces, shouting into his radio voice, just shaky enough that you can hear the guilt he's trying to outrun. Deshaun stands, frozen tears streaming, saying, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cause this." Sister B falls to her knees a few feet away and starts praying, "Lord, please, not like this." Then a nurse named Tamara walks out of the hospital down the block with 2 coworkers, sees my mom slam into that pole, and everything in her training kicks in. She covers her mouth for half a second, then she's running. One hand's already on her phone hitting record because she knows exactly how fast evidence disappears when the wrong people are in charge. She drops to her knees beside my mother, feels for a pulse, and you can hear her on the video, low and steady. "Ma'am, stay with me, breathe with me, you're not alone." Whitaker tells her to back off. She doesn't move an inch. 11 minutes pass before an ambulance shows up. 11 long minutes of my 70-year-old mother lying on July asphalt. Somewhere in that stretch, her eyelids flutter. Blood is sliding into one eye, and in this thin, fraying voice, she says, "Let me call my boy. Just let me call my boy." She doesn't know the phone is still in her purse. She doesn't know Tamara is catching every word. She just knows that the one person she's ever asked to come save her is sitting 2 hours away in the mountains. Up there, I'm on my porch with a mug of coffee going cold, watching bees float in and out of the hives, thinking maybe I finally figured out what peace feels like. My phone is face down next to me. The ringtone I use for my mother is a little gospel hook she loves. It plays, I smile without even thinking, and I pick up with a lazy, "Hey ma, what you doing?" What I get instead is breathing, thin, ragged, and then 4 words that cut straight through every layer of armor I thought I still had. "They hurt me, baby. Bad." Then there's noise in the background, metal voices, that chaotic echo you only hear in hospitals, and the line goes quiet. If you've ever heard someone you love sound like that, you know how the world narrows. The trees in front of me might as well have disappeared. For a few seconds I didn't move. Then all the parts of me I'd tried to bury with the bees and the quiet stood up. I slid the phone into my pocket without hanging up, walked into the bedroom and pulled an old black duffel from under the bed. Inside was a Glock I hadn't fired in years, 2 burner phones, a hard drive full of files I'd collected on officers and departments that never sat right with me, and a leather diary with a faint, rusty smear across one page. That smear is dried blood from Selma. The diary is my mother's. On that page, she wrote about kneeling on a bridge, pressing her hands over a stranger's wound while troopers swung batons, and at the bottom she wrote, "Silence is also violence." I tossed the diary into the bag, grabbed my keys, and headed for Atlanta. On the highway, with the mountains fading in the rear view, I called 2 people. First was Jax, my old intel guy, the kind of hacker governments don't admit they use. "Ghost," he said, "you better be calling about phishing." "I'm not." I told him I need everything on West Precinct in Easton. Complaints, missing body cam, hush money, all of it. He blew out a breath. "Somebody hurt your people," he said, "all right? I'll peel their walls open." Second call was to Captain Elena Torres from JAG. "They put my mother in a trauma bay," I said, "and they're already lying about why. She didn't ask for proof. Text me the hospital. She said I'll be there before sunrise." When I walked into Grady Memorial a couple hours later, the smell of antiseptic and metal hit me like a memory I didn't want back. On the intake board, I saw it. Harper Evelyn, critical. A nurse pointed me to Trauma 3. My mother was on the bed with a rigid collar around her neck, dried blood clumped in her hair, a thin oxygen tube across her face, monitors pulsing in the corner. A doctor was saying subdural hematoma and 50-50 like he was reading off a menu. I sat down, took her hand, opened that old diary on the bedside table to the line about silence, and realized I was absolutely done being quiet. A little while later, I felt someone in the doorway. Tamara stood there in scrub's eyes rimmed red, a tiny USB drive in her palm. "Mr. Hale," she said, "I was there. I recorded everything. I couldn't just let them write it the way they always do." I took the drive, looked her in the eye, saw fear and courage fighting for space on her face. "You didn't just save your conscience. I told her you might have just saved this whole city." She let out a breath and slipped away. In a family room off the ICU, I plugged that drive into my laptop and watched the worst minutes of my life from a stranger's camera. I watched my mother step forward, heard her say, "Officer, you don't have to talk to him like that." I watched Whitaker's hand shoot out her cane, vanish the shove, the impact, the blood. I listened to her whisper, "Let me call my boy like a prayer." I heard him lie while she lay unconscious. I played it again and again, until every badge number, every voice, every second was burned into me. Then I made a decision. I could point a gun at one man's head, or I could point the truth at all of them. My mother didn't raise me for the first option. By dawn, Elena had arrived. We took over a tiny conference room in the hospital's lower wing, spread out the files Jax kept sending, and started connecting dots. Missing footage labeled as battery failure right before critical moments. Civilian complaints dumped into dead folders. Internal affairs reports edited into something harmless. Deputy Chief Malcolm Reed's offshore accounts lining up perfectly with cases marked unsubstantiated. Elena looked at the board and said, "This isn't a few bad officers, Marcus. This is a machine." I nodded. "Then we don't just pull a wire," I said, "we show everyone the whole engine." Meanwhile, word about what happened to my mother was moving through the city. At New Hope, Reverend Naomi gathered folks and put Tamara's video up on the projector. When it ended, the sanctuary was dead quiet. Some people wanted to march, to shout, to shut the streets down. Naomi said, "We've seen cities burn and nothing change. Tonight we stand in silence at West Precinct. No fists, no chants, just bodies and eyes and truth. You know what I mean. Sometimes silence is louder than any slogan. Back at the hospital, we made our move. Jack spun up a bare site on a server he controlled. No ads, no comments, no tracking. At the top, in simple black letters, it said, "One call, truth." Under that heading, we loaded everything. Tamara's video, the missing seconds of Whitaker's body cam, internal emails, financial ledgers, 9 other cases they'd buried. When the last file finished, I took a breath and hit publish. Let them see, I said. Phones lit up on nightstands all over Atlanta. Group chats blew up. Reporters double-checked links they thought had to be fake. By 5:40 that morning, thousands of people were standing in complete silence outside West Precinct. No signs, no megaphones, just mothers with strollers, elders on canes, kids in hoodies, veterans in worn dress jackets, all facing that brick building. Reverend Naomi stood at the front and said, "We're not here to burn our home. We're here to bury the lies that poisoned it. Let the men who did this feel the weight we live with every day." Inside, Sergeant Victor Kane looked out a second-floor window and saw the crowd. And near the front, he saw an older woman with a cane looking up at him with the same disappointed eyes his mother had when troopers shoved her back in '69. Something in him finally broke. He walked outside, stepped past the line of uniforms, and dropped to his knees in front of everybody. "I remember what they did to her," he choked out, "and I became them." Cameras caught every word. Yeah, that actually happened. The rest you heard in headlines. Whitaker's history came out in full. Complaints, slurs, unsubstantiated force, and he went from the man with the badge to the man in a hospital bed sentenced on paper and in ways the courts will never mention. Reed went down on corruption and civil rights charges. Captain Brooks, the one who came to my mother's room with cheap flowers and a scripted apology, resigned and ended up working mall security in a uniform nobody respects anymore. Kane cooperated, lost his badge and his pension, and maybe gained back a piece of his soul. None of that gives my mother those 11 minutes back, but it sends a message written in something the city can't ignore. Her real justice is quieter. It's the morning her eyes really open and focus on me, the way her fingers curl weakly around my hand as she whispers, "You came." It's her, shaking her head at physical therapy and telling the young therapist, "Baby, I marched farther than this with tear gas in my lungs." It's the day she walks back into church with a cane and a scar at the back of her head, and the whole sanctuary rises to its feet and claps until she's sitting down, tears in her eyes and a little smile on her face. Reverend Naomi leans down and says, "This city stood for you because you never stopped standing for it." A week later, when she's home with a walker by the bed and casseroles stacked on every surface, I pack my duffel again. No gun this time, just clothes, her diary, a jar of honey from my hives. I kiss her forehead, tell her I'll be back every month, and she squeezes my hand and says, "Go back to your mountains, baby. You've carried enough. Let the truth walk on its own now." So I drive north back to the cabin, the bees, the quiet. The quiet's different now. It hums with her voice and the memory of thousands of people standing outside a precinct in silence, refusing to look away. That's my story. Not because I think I'm some hero, not because my mother is perfect, but because one old woman on a sidewalk whispered, "Let me call my boy," and that one call pulled years of buried truth into the light. So I want to hear from you. When you look at what happened, to her, to those officers, to that department, does it feel like justice to you? Too much. Not enough. Have you ever seen someone treated like they were less than human and had to decide whether to stay quiet or speak up? Tell me in the comments, tell me where you're watching from, tell me what you would have done. And if you want more stories where regular people push back and truth actually wins a round hit, like, subscribe and share this with someone who still thinks nothing ever changes. Sometimes all it takes is one nurse with a phone, one mother with a promise, and a city that finally chooses to listen.